All right, let's dive into a fascinating legal drama from the Philippines. You've got a development corporation that wants to register this beautiful piece of coastal land, but the government of the Philippines steps in and says, not so fast. This isn't just some simple property dispute, folks. This is a fight that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And it forced everyone to grapple with some huge questions about court power, legal procedure, and what it really means to own a piece of the earth.
And that brings us to the first big hook of this case. Just think about it. Can you go through a whole legal process, lose, and only then turn around and say, hey, wait a minute, this court never even had the right to hear this case? Is that a fair move, or is there a point where it's just too late to complain? That's the first major legal battleground we're going to walk through.
So, to really understand this whole thing, we've got to set the scene. We need to know who's fighting, what they're fighting over, and how this whole mess ended up in the highest court in the land. Okay, here's the prize, Lot 8060 in San Juan, Batangas. It's a decent-sized plot, just over 10,000 square meters, but I want you to look at that last number. The total assessed value is only 14,920 pesos. Now, that might sound incredibly low, but I need you to remember that number. Tuck it away, because as you're about to see, that very specific value becomes absolutely crucial later on.
You know, this case was a legal marathon, not a sprint. It all kicked off way back in 1997. Bantigue Corporation files their application to register the land. The government immediately opposes it. The case gets delegated down to the Municipal Trial Court, or MTC, and in 2001, the MTC sides with the corporation. But the government doesn't back down. They appeal to the Court of Appeals, but no luck, the CA agrees with the lower court. So after a string of losses, the Republic takes its fight to the very last stop, the Supreme Court, a full 15 years after this whole started.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. When the government brings its case to the higher courts, their first line of attack is a total surprise. They don't start by arguing about the land itself. Nope. They go right after the MTC's authority, questioning whether that court ever had the right to hear the case in the first place. The legal chess match begins. The government's argument was simple. The MTC lacked jurisdiction from the very beginning. But the Court of Appeals shot back with this powerful legal concept called estoppel. They basically told the government, look, you participated in the trial. You made your arguments. You can't just cry foul about the court's power now because you lost. You're too late to the party. And this principle is called estoppel by leeches. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward. It basically says you can't just sleep on your rights. If you wait for an unreasonably long time to make a legal claim, the court can say you've essentially given up that right, especially if bringing it up late would be unfair to the other side. So the Supreme Court had to decide, was the Republic really too late? They did this brilliant side-by-side comparison with a classic case on this topic, Tijum v. Sibong Hanoi. In Tijum, the party waited an incredible 15 years before questioning the court's jurisdiction. But in this case, the Republic raised the issue at the very first opportunity, on their first appeal. The Supreme Court looked at the two and said, these are not the same thing, not even close. And that led to a huge ruling. The Supreme Court sided with the Republic. They said the government was not estopped. Why? Because the rule is that a challenge to a court's fundamental power, its subject matter jurisdiction, is so important it can be raised at any time. So the Republic's challenge was officially in play. Okay, so with the green light to challenge the MTC's authority, the Republic launches a two-part attack. And this is where we get into the real nitty-gritty of legal procedure, all about timelines and property values. So here are the government's two main technical arguments. First, they pointed out that the court missed a deadline. The law says the initial hearing has to be set within 90 days, but the court set it for 96 days. Second, and this was their big one, they said the land was worth more than the 100,000 peso limit for a case in the MTC. The Supreme Court pretty much swatted that first argument away immediately. They said, listen, scheduling hearings is the court's job, not the applicant's. It would be completely unfair, the height of injustice, they called it, to punish the corporation for a delay they had zero control over. But that second argument, that one seemed like a winner. The government found the deed of absolute sale, which, funnily enough, was attached to the corporation's own application. And that document stated the selling price very clearly. And that price was 160,000 pesos. This felt like the smoking gun. Since 160,000 is obviously way more than the MTC's 100,000 peso limit, the government argued the case never should have been there in the first place. But this is a perfect example of how one single word in a law can change everything. The Supreme Court went straight to the law books, and the law is crystal clear. For these types of cases, jurisdiction isn't based on market value or selling price. It's based on one thing and one thing only, the assessed value from the official tax declaration. And remember that number from the very beginning? The total assessed value was just 14,920 pesos. That is well within the 100,000 peso limit. And just like that, the Republic's second argument fell apart. The Supreme Court confirmed that, yes, the MTC did have the proper jurisdiction to hear the case. So let's recap. The Republic has lost on the estoppel argument. They've lost on the jurisdiction argument. It really seems like this is a slam dunk for Bantigue Corporation. But the Supreme Court was not done yet. They brought up one last fundamental legal principle that completely flipped the script. I mean, can you imagine being the lawyers for Bantigue Corporation right now? You have successfully defended against every single procedural challenge thrown at you. You've proved the court had the power to hear your case. Victory seems certain. The finish line is right there. But then the Supreme Court pivoted. They shifted the entire focus away from the legal rulebook and onto the land itself. And in doing so, they invoked a doctrine that is at the very core of all property law in the Philippines. And that doctrine is the regalian doctrine. This is a massive concept. It's the foundational principle that says all land in the country, by default, belongs to the state. So if you're a private citizen or a corporation and you want to claim a piece of it, the burden of proof is entirely on you. You have to prove with undeniable, incontrovertible evidence that the government has officially classified that land as alienable and disposable, basically that it's open for private ownership. And the court got very, very specific about what that incontrovertible evidence looks like. It's a strict two-part test. First, you need a certification from the local environment office. But that's not enough. You also need the second and much more important document, a certified copy of the original classification that was approved by the head of the whole department, the DNR secretary. And here it is, the final twist. When the Supreme Court went back and looked at all the evidence, they found that Bantigue Corporation had only submitted the first part, the local certification. They were missing that crucial second piece of proof, the high-level approval from the DNR secretary. Their evidence at the end of the day was incomplete. So, after all these years and all these legal twists and turns, how did it all end? And more importantly, what is the big lesson we should all take away from this incredible legal battle? In what you might call an act of judicial fairness, the Supreme Court didn't just slam the door and deny the application. Instead, they remanded the case, which means they sent it back down to the MTC. They gave Bantigue Corporation a second chance, an opportunity to go find that missing document, the DNR secretary's approval, and finally complete their evidence. Ultimately, this case leaves us with a really powerful question. Bantigue Corporation won on every single technical and procedural point. They played by the rules of the court, but that wasn't enough. The Supreme Court showed that when it comes to registering land in the Philippines, winning the technical arguments doesn't matter if you can't get over the biggest hurdle of all, the regalian doctrine. You have to provide absolute, undeniable proof that the land you're claiming isn't the state's. And that's the final, crucial lesson from the fight for Bantigue points.